My name is Paula Coomer, and I'm the author of two food books. One is Blue Moon Vegetarian, which is a memoir of my husband's 18-month period of time when we were transitioning from omnivore to vegan. And then also the follow-up cookbook, Blue Moon Vegan, which also includes gluten-free recipes as well. So what I'm going to do now is to make a recipe from Blue Moon Vegan. It's called Disappearing Kale Salad. Kale's a really wonderful vegetable. If you haven't discovered it yet, you can use it, you can cook it. We probably all remember our mothers trying to get us to eat that awful canned kale that we had to eat when we were kids. But fresh kale is actually much more flavorful, much more wonderful, and can add a great amount of nutrition with a really a small amount in whatever you happen to be cooking. So in soups, in salads, and in other main courses. I actually use it along with spinach in my lasagna. Disappearing kale salad is really interesting because it puts not only gives you a good amount of kale and two different kinds of cabbage. The dressing is made from pumpkin seeds, which gives it a nice creamy texture and a nutty flavor. So I'm going to start then by washing the kale and by chopping it up finely. And kale is it's kind of fibrous. You probably remember it from that canned stuff that we used to have to eat. But one way to get over the fibrousness is to do something we call massaging the kale before we actually cut it up. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to wash the kale under running water, and then I'm going to massage it. And that massaging activity is, I'll use this one since it looks like it's starting to go a little bit bad, but it's really literally just a matter, you can hear it, all those little fibers kind of breaking it up. So that's all you do, is just kind of wad it up a little bit and maneuver it to break loose those fibers and make it a little bit easier to eat when it's raw. Kale has a lot of amazing nutrients that are hard to get in other places. You've probably heard it referred to as a power food or a superfood. A lot of people put kale in their smoothies and protein shakes. I just happen to like it raw. So as I said, I'm just going to work on trying to break up those fibers. You notice that I broke off the stalks, the really more fibrous part. If I were using this in soup or something, I would cut this up finely, or maybe even run it through the food processor and grate it and use it that way. All right, so I just want to chop this up really well. This kale salad is when in working in with the red cabbage, you want to try to have the consistency, the sizes of the pieces the same as the kale. So when you think about chopping the kale, chop it in as small pieces as you possibly can. And also this allows for more of it to be coated with that fantastic dressing that I'll make for you here in just a moment. Of course, if you're going to put kale in a smoothie, you don't necessarily have to go to so much trouble unless your blender isn't very powerful. And in that case, then you probably do want to spend some time breaking it up. Kale is also great to juice. If you really want to give yourself a super boost, run some kale through your juicer and drink it in straight shots. And you'll have energy for today and probably tomorrow too. So you can see how fine this is. Pretty smallish pieces, just like you would any kind of salad. So I put that all in the bowl. And I'm actually making this for a crowd, so I'm making quite a bit of it. Basically, I'm doubling the recipe as it appears in Blue Moon Vegan. Then I'm going to use two different kinds of cabbage. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut out the core. The recipe calls for 1/4 of a head of red cabbage and green cabbage. And these are a little bit small, so the heads are a little bit small, so I'm probably going to use just a little bit more than 1/4 of a head on each of these. But same thing, I want it to be, I want the pieces to be pretty small. And so I'm going to cut it pretty thin. Now you can do this on a food processor if you like. I'm just one of those people who would rather do things by hand than use a machine if there's any way possible. So rather than grate it up on the food processor, I just do it by hand. So I'm looking at the amount of cabbage I have now, and you can see that I've used actually almost all of this. As I said, it was a small head of cabbage to start, but I'm going to stop right there because I don't want the cabbage flavors to overpower the kale. I really want the two cabbages to be in balance with the kale. And when you're cooking, when you're inventing in the kitchen, you know, balance is always one of the things that you think about. You want to balance textures, you want to balance flavors, you want to balance acid and base. So that's the amount of the red cabbage, and it's going to get to looking kind of Christmassy over here. And so I have the same routine that I need to go through again with the green cabbage. And incidentally, this is a good time to talk about organic produce and why it's a good idea to buy organic over what we would call commercial crops. Organically grown produce uses no pesticides, no chemical fertilizers, and it's grown using more akin to the kind of processes that you might use if you were growing it in your backyard garden. And it is the case that you will often notice that organic produce might be a little bit smaller, but if you compare flavor-wise, you'll notice that organic produce tends to have more flavor, and definitely it's been shown that it's nutritionally superior because it grows a little bit more slowly. So, and also, one of the things about artificial fertilizers or chemical fertilizers is that because they cause the plant to grow so quickly, they don't send their roots deep enough in the soil to get trace minerals that it turns out our bodies need. So part of our nutritional deficiency that we're all suffering in this time in history has to do with use of chemical fertilizers. All right, so the same thing with the green. I'm just chopping it up. Okay, so that's a little bit more than what I had with the red. Not too much, but pretty close. So I've got now 3 different kinds of vegetable in there, the red cabbage, the green cabbage, and the kale. And now I'll move on to assembling the salad and putting together the dressing. In order to save time and sweat, I did go ahead and run the carrot and the onion through the food processor, and I'll go ahead and put them in the salad now. And what I've done, you might notice that I moved the vegetables to a larger bowl, and that's because, as I mentioned, I'm making this for a crowd, and I was a little bit worried about having enough space for everything to get mixed thoroughly. So this ends up being a very colorful salad. You've got not only the deep green of the kale, but you've got the red and the paler green of the cabbages, and now you've got that great orange color thrown in from the carrots. And so this ends up just being a very lovely salad in terms of appearance. As I mentioned, one of the very interesting things about this dressing is the fact that the base of it is pumpkin seed, and pumpkin seed has a lot of nutrition. Specifically has a certain amount of protein, it has some fiber, and has some other necessary nutrients that are a little bit hard to get, such as magnesium, which especially for vegans, magnesium can be a nutrient that we tend to not be able to get quite enough of. While I'm on the subject, I should also talk about B12, which is also a nutrient that vegans have a hard time getting enough of, and really the best thing that you can possibly do is just simply to take a supplement. That's a subject that's well addressed in Blue Moon Vegan and in Blue Moon Vegetarian as well, so I won't go into it in any more detail here, except to say that if you decide to set out on this path, you do have to be very careful about getting enough vitamin B12. All right, so if you've never worked with pumpkin seed before, you might want to try a handful just so you can have an understanding of the taste. But by the time it's mixed in with the other ingredients, it really does sort of disappear into just this nice creamy dressing. So you start with the food processor and put in your pumpkin seed. Now, I have made a lot of salad. My recipe calls for 3/4 cup of pumpkin seed, but I'm going to go ahead and double that amount. For one thing, I really love this dressing, and I love it when the salad is just drenched in the dressing. Most of us, I think, eat salad for the dressing. So I'm actually going to double up this recipe. You could actually try this dressing with other things beside pumpkin seed. You could try almonds. You could try, especially cashews work well. You could also try sunflower seed. I just happen to like the pumpkin seed because of there's just a little bit different flavor and creaminess to it that works well to me with the slaw and with the cabbages. So I'm doubling that up. I also need 4 cloves of garlic. So a little trick with garlic, if you don't know this, this can be a game changer for you. If you're like me, I've messed up my nails a couple of times trying to peel garlic cloves, but if you smash them first, then that outer skin just comes right off. It practically falls off. And of course, the great thing about the food processor is that you don't have to bother with trying to mince. You can just drop it in there whole. Garlic, as you may know, is really good if you have trouble with blood pressure. In fact, you can even get garlic capsules if you decide to go non-traditional instead, or decide to go alternative medicine instead of Western medicine. You can take garlic capsules for your high blood pressure. And then another thing I need is some fresh ginger. The recipe calls for 2 tablespoons, so I'm going to double that to 4. Ginger is excellent for your digestion. It also has a little bit of a mood elevator element to it. So anytime you can find a reason to throw ginger into something, it's a good idea to do that. It can help prevent colds and a number of other things as well. It does have to be peeled, which is a little bit tedious. All right, so I've got a good chunk of ginger here. I'm just going to go ahead and throw it in. Ginger can be overpowering, so you want to be careful not to get too much. But this recipe calls for a fair amount, so I'm not worried. And if I grated this up, of course, it would take up more space, so I'm just really estimating. But again, that's part of the fun of cooking, is learning to feel your way through and not just be dependent on measurements. The other thing it calls for is something called tamari. Tamari is a substitute for soy sauce. It's actually really probably the original soy sauce because it's made with actual soybeans. Most of the soy sauce that people use nowadays comes from wheat. So tamari has no wheat in it. This particular recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of tamari. I happen to use the reduced sodium variety because, as I've learned, humans are a little like earthworms, and that is that we don't actually do very well when we're exposed to salt. So anything that you can do to reduce salt or reduce sodium in your diet is going to be beneficial to you. So I'm just pouring that right in, and because I'm doubling it, I'm going to use 4 tablespoons instead of 2. And normally if I were just cooking on my own, I probably wouldn't measure. But because I'm cooking this for other people, I want to make sure it comes out exact as the recipe prescribes. The other thing I'm going to use is coconut milk. That's going to be my thinning ingredient for this. Is going to be what's going to turn those pumpkin seeds down to nice creamy base. I like to get my coconut milk in a little container like this because I can screw the lid back on and reuse it. You want to be very careful to use organic, of course, for all the reasons that we talked about earlier. And this calls for, again, for 2 tablespoons. So I'm going to go with 4. You notice that it is really thick and really creamy in this form. And remember also, coconut contains those mid-chain fatty acids. The last ingredient is something called Vegenaise, which I actually am using a substitute today because it was on sale. Vegenaise is a vegan mayo that I happen to really love. One characteristic about Vegenaise is that it has to be kept in the refrigerator even before it's open. So something to keep in mind when you're shopping and purchasing it. But it's a really nice mayo, no eggs in it, of course, hence the name Vegenaise. And we've found it to be just a terrific product. At times I make my own mayo. It's not a hard thing to do, but because I'm just sort of on a schedule here today, I decided to go ahead and purchase it. Now I'm going to first grind up those pumpkin seeds and the garlic and the ginger here for a few minutes before I put the Vegenaise in. So I wanted to get the pumpkin seeds and all that chopped up pretty fine. My food processors are getting a little bit old, so a newer one is going to work better than this. But anyway, I'm going to stop now at mid-phase and go ahead and put a little bit of Vegenaise in. Now, one thing about this dressing is it ends up being pretty thick and pretty creamy. If you don't like it that creamy, you can always add a little more just regular liquid coconut milk that you would keep in the fridge, you know, that comes in an actual box. But let's just see how this works out for now. So the original recipe calls for 1 cup of Vegenaise. Obviously, since I'm doubling it, I'm going to need 2 cups. And my substitute, this is actually Earth Balance. I'm not touting particular brands necessarily, just telling you things that work for me that I like. And this is another brand of vegan mayo that I happen to like. So I'm just going to put, I know that a pint is 2 cups, so I don't really have to measure this. But I want to give this a chance to get really nice and creamy, so I'm going to run it through here again. Okay, that's getting pretty smooth, so I'm just going to scrape down the sides here. And this looks really nice and creamy like it should. It's a little bit thick. And the flavor is just terrific. So what I'm going to do then is just try to thin it down with a tiny bit of, I think I have maybe some almond milk in the fridge. And again, this is what I'm talking about when I say substitution. It's okay to try out something you haven't tried before. Almond milk and coconut milk are pretty close to the same in texture. As I said earlier, I really like a lot of dressing. I like everything to be fully saturated, so I'm going to be pretty liberal with the amount that I put on here. Even at that, I think I'm probably going to have quite a bit left over, and that's okay. It'll keep for a couple of weeks into the fridge, and you can use it on other salads as well. And you can see that now what I've ended up with is sort of a nice dressing consistency. And I'll start out by putting on, about half and seeing how far that takes me. The nice thing about this salad too is that it gets better with time. So since my get-together isn't until tomorrow, it's just about right for this to sit overnight in the fridge and for all the flavors to sort of merge with each other. And what we'll have tomorrow then is just a really delicious salad that's also very nutritious. Has a bit of protein in it, and also a good amount of trace minerals and nutrients. Okay, I think that's it. I think our disappearing kale slaw is done. And you can see that it just looks like, looks pretty inviting, right? And that's it. That's all it is.